Hello everybody and welcome to the Video Games Are Bad For You podcast. This is a special mini episode because we're not really going to have time to cover Nintendo on this weekend's podcast. We're going to mostly focus on Google and the Stadia announcement because I have a lot of thoughts on that. But I figured that it was worthwhile to at least do a little bit of coverage on Nintendo's fantastic GDC conference today. Most notably, I want to target the announcement of the Cadence of Hyrule by the developers of Crypt of the Necrodancer. This is such cool news. It was a really brilliant idea for Nintendo to hand over one of their core IPs to an indie developer with this much personality. While I'm not the biggest fan of Crypt of the Necrodancer, I think that the idea to blend Zelda with some of these more strange or unique indie gameplay styles is really clever, and it'll work out very well for them. For a little while now, I've been a bit skeptical of the Nintendo Switch. It's not that I don't like the console, I actually like it quite a bit, but I do think its release got a little bit of like a steroid injection. And that steroid injection came from the Wii U. You see, the Wii U's problem was that it wasn't very popular. It wasn't a bad console, not by any stretch of the word. I think a lot of gamers knew that. They just didn't want to shell out for the console itself. Many of the Wii U's games developed such a cult following that when Nintendo transitioned into this new console and brought some of those games with them, a lot of fans immediately rolled back into the fold. And the Switch had what I would call a padded first year. It had a very loaded first year for a console release. The reason for that is that it was cannibalizing so much of the Wii U's library. And that is why last year I found the Switch to be much more disappointing, but also much more in line with expectations. The Switch had a much less successful second year than it did a first year. That's because they had finished sort of absorbing that Wii U library and churning it back out for fans. You see, this was sort of a tourniquet on a more serious wound. Nintendo's problem for the past three consoles has been their lack of third-party support. On top of that, they can't generate games in-house at a fast enough rate to make it worth owning their consoles. It was an issue with the Wii and an issue with the Wii U, and it was covered up for the Switch, because Nintendo was effectively using their previous console as a third-party developer by releasing games like Bayonetta and these Mario games on their new device. And that is why I am so happy about the news today, because this is one way where Nintendo can puff up their output while not sacrificing a lot of their brand. They can hand over these IPs to trusted developers while they generate their own in-house properties. On top of that, we got the Cuphead news, which is very similar. The more indie games and indie developers that Nintendo can pull into their fold, the better off they will be and the longer this console's life is going to last. Following last year, I really thought that the Switch was going to have a similar life to the Wii. The Wii was so popular initially, and that was because it was so new, and it was because it opened with a lot of killer apps. But then that third-party issue crept in, Nintendo's slow development process crept in, and the Wii started to tail off. By the end of its life cycle, the Wii was a failing console. I don't know if the Switch was ever going to be a failing console, but I did expect it to sort of enter like a lion and exit like a lamb. But this announcement could mark a change in direction for Nintendo in the positive, and it could inject enough creativity, newness, and frankly content into the Switch to give it a lifespan beyond a couple years. Possibly the number one challenge of the Switch is getting out from under the shadow of being a novelty console. The Switch is absolutely a unique idea, and a really good one. But if it lacks games, it's going to be reduced to its central gimmick. And I'm not saying the Switch doesn't have good games, it absolutely does. But the well was drying, and it was drying very quickly. My hope is that the investment in these indie developers will stave off any decline in the Switch and keep it going for years and years to come. As a fan of Nintendo and as a fan of the Switch, nothing would make me happier. Alright, so that does it for us for now. This weekend's podcast is going to be mostly about the Google Stadia. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on Nintendo, especially on Zelda, you can listen to our first podcast or check out our YouTube page. I did a huge piece on Breath of the Wild. It's been a pretty crazy games week and a really good week of news. Most of this news has thankfully been very exciting, although the Google news frankly scares me. But we'll be here to cover it, all of it, for the weekend. Thanks for listening. If you want to get in touch with the podcast, you can check out all the links below. We're on Twitter, check us out. Subscribe, like, you guys know the deal. And I hope you're having as good a week as Nintendo.